Hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of This Week in the Clinic. I'm Josh Gitalis, clinical nutritionist and functional medicine practitioner, and I'm super excited to bring you this segment, this show, whatever you want to call it. Why? Because every week I'm working with real human beings in the flesh and blood. And there's many different discoveries that I make. There's many different discoveries that we make together. And that's where the true lessons lie. You know, you can read tons of books, you can read tons of studies, you can go to lectures, you can attend summits, you can do all of this stuff called information gathering. But then when you go and apply it to yourself, when you go and apply it if you're a practitioner to other people, you realize that, things aren't as simple as they seem. You know, things take on a different form, and it's not always by the textbook, right? You know, in medicine, they have a phrase, this is a textbook case. And that's someone who, based on what has been written out in the textbooks, in terms of a diagnosis, let's say, fits that exact description. And as humans, we love that. We love when that happens because we like to have things in black and white. We like to be, fully yes or fully no. We get uncomfortable in that gray area, that in between, right? When we're waiting for something, when we're waiting for an answer, that's when we have a little bit discomfort. So we like to have black and white. So when we have a textbook case or a textbook client or a textbook patient in medicine, we love that because then we have a certain set of rules we can follow. Now, in functional nutrition and functional medicine and integrative healthcare, that's where we dive deep into working with people with personalized protocols. And when we're dealing with a single person rather than a single disease, we see that there's a diverse set of factors that play into any person's case. And I always say there's 7 billion people on the planet, and therefore there should be 7 billion different approaches and protocols. I've seen hundreds of clients, but I've never given 2 protocols that are the same because I believe everyone is an individual and it should be personalized towards them. So that's what I'm going to bring to you in this segment, This Week in the Clinic. As I go through my week and work with people, I have discoveries, I have revelations, I have things that I learn that I want to share with you so that you can actually learn from this as well. Because we are all on this constant journey of health, and when we can learn from other people, we can learn and apply it to ourselves. Okay, so, and I've got my Facebook page just open here in front of me. So if you have any questions or comments as you're coming along or as you're watching, you can feel free to post them below, and I'm actually going to see it live. So if you're joining me live, awesome. We can have a little interaction going on. If you're watching this later, that's cool too. So we have a little bit of an itinerary. I wanted to talk about a couple cases that I dealt with this week. And we're going to first look at, what happened with those individuals. Then we're going to go through a little bit of almost a lesson on thyroid, and then we're going to loop back around and talk about what you can do as a person trying to stay healthy, and maybe you have thyroid issues, maybe you don't. And this is for both groups of people. Why? Because we want to prevent these things from happening years before they become a problem. Another thing that I see is that, once you're at a point where you have a diagnosis, right? What's a diagnosis? Diagnosis is naming a group of symptoms. So once you get to a point where you can name something, you've already developed it over a long period of time. You've already been manifesting that disease process over probably many years. And of course, the amount of time you're doing that varies with whatever you're dealing with. So again, for those of you joining me late, I'm Josh Gitalis, clinical nutritionist and functional medicine practitioner, and today we're talking about thyroid health, some of the lessons that I've learned in the clinic this week. So we're going to get into it. First, one client that I'd like to chat about, we just started working together, and a variety of symptoms were presented. And one of the questions I asked them was, have you had your thyroid checked? And they said, yeah, I think I've had it checked over the years. And I'm like, and I think, they said that the last time they had it checked was about 2 years ago. So I said, you know what, give me the most recent blood work. I want to take a look. I want to see if there's anything significant there, and we'll see, what next steps we can take. So I was sent the blood work, and what I found was that this individual actually did all the right blood tests for thyroid, but they had extremely high levels of thyroid antibodies. And this was 2 years ago, and no intervention or changes were made. So that was a big red flag for me. And the lesson we can learn from this is to, first of all, keep your blood work all the time. 2, we can learn a lot when we look at blood work over the years. And 3, make sure you get all the right tests, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So that was one example. And another person that I was working with recently on thyroid had quite severe hyperthyroidism, and revealed by a few of the numbers, TSH, free T3, and free T4, it showed that her thyroid was overactive. But what was missing was thyroid antibodies. I wanted to know if the body was attacking the thyroid, because there's a differentiation between a situation where our immune system is attacking our thyroid and a situation where it's just a metabolic imbalance. So we're going to dive into that. But first, we're going to talk about how common thyroid issues are. And I'm just looking online here to see what comments have come in, and I just see some people saying thank you for sharing this. I see Tracy and Melanie. Laurent has joined us, and that's awesome. Thanks for joining me. And you're most welcome. And this is why I do what I do, because I wanted to bring the clinical aspect of things into your hands, because you can only learn so much from a book. So first of all, how common are thyroid issues? Well, based on the amount of stuff that I see come out on it, it's obviously quite common. 27, these are US stats, so 27 million people from the US have some sort of thyroid disease. About 13 million of those people are undiagnosed. And we're going to talk about why a lot of those people might be undiagnosed, and how to make sure you're not a statistic, you're not getting into those stats. About 14 million of those people have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, so they have been diagnosed. But I don't have stats on this, but it'd be interesting to know how many of those 14 million are actually experiencing improvement after their treatment. And that's what we're going to dive a little bit deeper in today. So if you're joining me live and you're enjoying this so far and you're engaged, you can press the like button. You can actually, the cool thing about this, I just learned this, is that you can do it multiple times if you like what I'm saying. That really gives me an idea that you're listening, that you're here, that there's actually humans on the other side of this camera. So I see a couple thumbs up coming through, so I know you guys are alive and ready for the information. So we're going to, again, as I go through this, I want to give you a little bit about what we see in the books and then what actually happens in the clinic. So firstly, if we go into any textbook, if we go into a book on thyroid, we're going to see a list of symptoms. They're going to say, okay, people with Hashimoto's or thyroid issues, hypothyroid, typically have these symptoms. Now, what I can say is from experience, some people have those symptoms. Some people don't have those symptoms. Some people with hypothyroidism actually have symptoms of hyper, and some people with hyper have symptoms of hypo. So there's this meshing of a lot of the symptoms. But I want to present you with the top 10 symptoms. The top 10 things that I look for, that is a red flag that tells me, hey, we need to investigate further. Symptoms are the language of the body. They are a way that your body communicates with you to tell you you're doing something wrong, right? I'm speaking English. I think most of you are English-speaking individuals, or you probably wouldn't be watching right now. That's the language I've chosen to communicate with you about, and the language of the body is symptoms. So once we sort of learn that, it helps us to target and get a little bit closer as to what our goal is with our individual clients or with ourselves, right? So symptoms can give us a very valuable window into what's happening into the body. And here in the clinic, when we work with a client, we actually have at least 11-page intake here. And we ask them over about a 4-hour appointment, a whole bunch of symptoms to really get a thorough history, right? And that gives us some great insight. And then that leads us to where we're going to go next. Do we test this? Do we test that? Do we try this? Do we try that? But symptoms are an amazing way of learning what's going on in the body. So what are the sort of the top 10 symptoms that I focus on when I'm looking for possible thyroid issues? And just before I go there, for those of you who may not be familiar with the thyroid, it sits in your neck, right? And it is the thermostat of the body. It actually controls how quickly all the cells move in the body, right? If it's overactive, things are moving too fast. If it's underactive, things are moving too slow. So some of the symptoms associated with thyroid issues, mostly underactive thyroid, are fatigue, right? So if you think about it, if that thyroid isn't working at full tilt, you're going to feel tired. You can't make energy at the speed and efficiency like you would like to. Weight gain and trouble losing weight. Feeling cold, so people complain of cold hands and feet, even on the hottest days of the year. Dry hair and skin, right? Hair loss. Menstrual irregularities, and because the thyroid controls the speed at which all the cells move, it has a profound influence on females and female hormones and the different steroid hormones that may or may not be produced by those individuals. So those are the first 5. Edema, so water retention, getting swelling in your hands, ankles, toes, fingers. Muscle aches and joint pain. Constipation and depression. Yeah, there's a very strong connection between thyroid and depression. So, these are not such fun symptoms to experience, and a lot of people go to their doctors with these symptoms and they say what's going on, and then the investigative process begins. So we've talked about how common thyroid issues are. We've spoken about some of the symptoms. Now we're going to get into a little bit about why the standard of care is falling short. If you join me a little bit later on, we're talking about thyroid health today and lessons that I've learned in the clinic. So we're going to talk about now why the standard of care is falling short. And why do I think the standard of care is falling short? Because many of those people who have gone through the standard of care end up in my office. They end up in my clinic. And I ask them, hey, why are you here? And they say, well, I still have these issues. I went through the regular standard treatment, and I didn't really find any resolution. And that's how they end up here. So we have to ask some questions. Why is the standard of care failing, and why are they falling short? Now, I'm just going to see if there's any comments or questions coming in. I see that there's a few coming in, so I'm going to address them in a moment. But again, if you're joining me, you can give me the old thumbs up so I know that you're listening. It's not like a regular Facebook page where you type it once and you like it, but you can do it multiple times just so I know you're with me, or you're liking or not liking what I'm saying. So let's just talk a little bit about what the standard of care is, okay? So I go to the doctor. I say, I have some of these symptoms. I'm tired. I can't lose weight. My hair is brittle. I have constipation, and I'm just feeling down. And what do? They send you for a thyroid test, and the thyroid test consists of something called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, some of you might be surprised that thyroid stimulating hormone has nothing, well, I wouldn't say nothing, but isn't even the hormone that the thyroid produces. This is a hormone that your pituitary sends a message to your thyroid to say, make thyroid hormone. That's TSH, that's the messenger, and that's what they measure. So they go, you get a blood test, you get your TSH levels back, and if it's within range, which is a very wide range, they say you're fine. If you're out of the range, then they usually will treat you, if it's hypothyroid, with a synthetic thyroid hormone. And that's it. That's done. That's the standard of care. Now, where does that fall short? Well, the National Academy of Clinical Biochemistry in 2002 made some statements saying that the TSH range is too wide. That people in this range, and the range for those of you who are interested is about 0.5 to about 5, depending on the lab, it varies a little bit. And people in this range still have thyroid issues or thyroid symptoms. They're still suffering from some sort of imbalance. So the National Academy of Clinical Biochemistry in 2002 put this information out there, and they suggested that the new measure be between 0.3 and 3.04, which is a much narrower range. Now we're getting into what I call the optimal range for thyroid. Okay? Normal range, optimal range. Right? Still feeling symptoms, decreasing, optimal, not feeling any symptoms. That's where we want to be. That's the goal. So they're suggesting that the range is too big, and from what I see in the clinic, again, this is definitely true. People are experiencing symptoms. They're maybe even on thyroid medications, and they're not finding resolution. To further our discussion on TSH, the standard of care, the one hormone that's tested, there was a study in PLOS ONE in 2011, and what they did was they had two groups of people. One group were on medications for thyroid, thyroxine, a synthetic thyroid hormone, and the other group were on no medications at all, so they weren't being treated. And what they did was they measured their T3 and T4. And what they found was the group on the medication, okay, so they're following the exact standard of care. They had T3, free T3, below, well, about 15.2% of these individuals had free T3 below the normal range, okay, when tested, when looked at, the free T3. For those individuals with no medications, they weren't being treated, about 29.6% of them had levels that were below normal for free T3 and free T4. So yeah, treatment did help a little bit, but there was still a group that was not getting what they needed. So let's further the discussion a little bit. We talked about the standard of care being TSH. But now we're learning that, hey, wait a second, when we treat TSH, when we measure it and treat for it, there's these other things called free T3 and free T4 that Josh is talking about right now that may be important too, though they might be out of balance. What is T3 and T4? Well, as I mentioned, the pituitary sends a message to the thyroid via TSH saying, hey, thyroid, can you make some thyroid hormone? And then thyroid makes T4, mostly T4, a little bit of T3, but mostly T4. And then that T4 circulates in the body and converts into T3, and T3 is the gold. That's where the action is. That's the hormone that's really going to work its magic. Some of it gets converted in the gut. So hint, hint, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in later episodes, gut health is super, super important for thyroid health, something that has to be addressed before we actually get to the thyroid, something that's upstream. And then most T4 is converted in the periphery is what it's called, so outside of the thyroid. So now we're learning that there's now TSH made in the pituitary, there's T4 made in the thyroid and T3, and then a good chunk of that T4 is converted in the body. So wouldn't you want to know what the thyroid's actually doing? Because this study published in PLOS ONE in 2011 is saying if we're just treating TSH, we're getting TSH in the normal range, some of these other hormones are still out of balance. And that's not good, okay? Because that person will still experience symptoms. It's like a hidden situation. You know, here's an example of what's going on here. You know, you have maybe you, when you were young this happened, or maybe you have children, and you give them a note. You give them a note to take to their teacher. It's maybe something important about a day you have to miss school, or like something with your homework or something. And you write the note, and you give the kid the note, and you're like, oh, I gave the kid the note. They got my note. Everything should be fine. You know, I'm positive that kid is going to deliver that note to their teacher, and the teacher is going to read the note and understand what's going on. That maybe seems a little ridiculous. I think that's a lot for a 6-year-old to handle, okay? It's the same with the thyroid. We can't really trust what the thyroid is doing if we're just looking at that note, at the TSH, the message from the pituitary to the thyroid. That's lacking, and it's not really getting the full picture. We're dealing with the tip of the iceberg. And again, I'm not making this up. This was first established by the National Academy of Clinical Biochemistry in 2002, and there's lots of research. One, we talked about this study in 2001 in PLOS One. So just a couple quotes from that study. Went like a couple of their conclusions. A subset of patients do not reach serum free T3 and free T4 ratio within the reference range. These patients therefore live in chronic condition of abnormal thyroid hormone availability for the peripheral tissues, even if the administered levothyroxine dose is able to maintain the serum TSH within the normal range. The insufficient T3 peripheral production cannot be appropriately corrected by increasing levothyroxine because T4 inhibits the conversion and furthers the problem. So what do? They try to increase the dose of the synthetic thyroid hormone, but to their dismay, it doesn't really work, right? Because the T4 itself stops the conversion. Okay, so we're getting into some complicated stuff, and I'm sure I have people tuning in that are of all levels. And I'm doing that because we're going to dial back and we're going to talk about just the key things that you need to do as an informed person, patient, to make sure your thyroid health is up to snuff. But also, if you want to dive deep into the research and understand the why behind it, I'm providing that as well. So again, for those of you who have not joined me from the beginning, we're talking about some lessons that I've learned in the clinic today. We're talking about thyroid health. We started by talking about how common thyroid issues. Actually, I started by talking about a couple case studies, a couple cases that have come through the clinic this week. How common thyroid issues are, right? Some symptoms associated with that. Why the standard of care is falling short. That's what we were just talking about. And how to properly discover imbalances, which we're about to get to. So I want to talk a little bit more about why we're falling short with the standard of care. Now I see a couple comments come in. I just want to address one from Karen White. I've been trying to make health changes for the past 6 months and doing it on my own. I have rosacea and I'm on medication for PTSD. I'm overweight. I have a significant amount of stress in my life because my son has a physical disability and mental health issues. I'm not able to work, okay? I follow you and Megan and a couple other people, so I'm trying to change my diet, but my biggest roadblock is financially being able to sustain it. I know too much now, and I'm learning so much, and I want to make things happier for me and my son. I'm doing my best that I can, but do you have any suggestion of doing this on a very small budget, or how to do this when there is so much information and it's overwhelming sometimes? And I laugh because I think a lot of people have that same sentiment as you. You know what? This will probably be something I discuss in a future episode, but when you address the fundamentals, you can make huge changes, and it usually doesn't cost you much. So that's the important place to start with any condition. What are the fundamentals? Drinking lots of clean water, getting enough sleep, movement, keeping your circadian rhythms good and eating, whole foods, good foods that are not depleted and not processed. And starting just with those few things, you can make a huge impact on everything, right? I think I could reopen my practice and name it the fundamentals, and everyone would just come in and we get them sleeping properly, we get them drinking water, we get them having whole foods, we get them moving their body, we get them doing some stress management, and we'd probably handle maybe about 70 to 80% of people's conditions. So start with the fundamentals. Don't stop trying. Don't stop searching. It's all great. And Karen also mentions, I don't understand why my GP wouldn't know this. And the reason is because the standard of care hasn't updated their information as of yet. Yes, there's some enlightened GPs out there, but mostly following the standard of care do not know this information. And on average, it takes about 17 years for information to be incorporated into the standard of care. 17 years. So as, who wants to suffer something for 17 years, right? We have to jump on it a lot quicker if we want to take care of ourselves. So let's move along here. Now, what we've been talking about is TSH, free T3, and free T4, but there's a whole other area of autoimmune thyroid issues. And for that, we need to check if people have antibodies to their thyroid, if they're attacking their thyroid, which is a whole other can of worms. In Dr. Datis Karazian's book, Why Do I Still Have Thyroid Symptoms? He talks about a case study where this individual had normal lab results, so they fell within the normal range. So they were never treated, but they had quite severe Hashimoto's thyroiditis, an autoimmune condition. In January, their TSH was 4.5. February was 0.08, moving towards hyper. March, it was 2.3, closer to optimal. April, it was 3.8. May, it was 8.7, hypothyroid. June, 7.4, and July, 1.6. So TSH, again, going back on this key measure, is just the tip of the iceberg. So we need to check thyroid antibodies as well. And another lesson that I've learned from this, from my clinic, is that we need to check these 5 things because they're so important. These 5 levels of thyroid, because sometimes it's a metabolic disorder and those hormones are off, but sometimes it's autoimmune and we're actually making antibodies. And for that, we check anti-thyroglobulin and anti-thyroperoxidase. Okay? So, and I even remember one situation where I sent a client to go to their doctor to get those tested, and they came back to me and said, oh, my doctor didn't know what anti-TPO and anti-TG is. So now we actually write out the full name on our forms, okay? Anyway, moving right along, how do we properly discover imbalances? Well, firstly, see if you have symptoms. See if you have the fatigue, weight gain, dry hair and skin, hair loss, menstrual irregularities, edema, muscle aches, joint pain, constipation, depression, which are the top thyroid indications. Next, go and get, all of the thyroid tests done, not just the tip of the iceberg. So my bare minimum is TSH, free T3 and free T4. Free means it's not bound to any proteins in the blood, so it's free. Your body can actually use it. Anti-TPO, anti-thyroperoxidase, and anti-TG, anti-thyroglobulin. Okay, so if that's all you take away from our discussion here today of this week in the clinic, know that you need to get those 5 done. You might have some arguments with your doctor, but even offer to pay for them. They're super important if you have these symptoms. Once you get those results back, you want to work with a healthcare practitioner to understand what they mean and to see how you can get in the, first of all, if you're in the normal range, second, if you're in the optimal range, and if you're not, what to do about it. Okay? And that's the final thing, what we can do. So we can first gather that information, then we can make changes to help support the thyroid. And there's many factors associated with good thyroid health, many nutrients. Dr. Jeffrey Bland calls the thyroid the sentinel of the body. You know, it kind of senses when things are off. Dr. Bernard Jensen, you know, who's passed away, you know, but, you know, was one of the greats in the integrative health field. He saw 350,000 patients. He says the thyroid's the second dirtiest place in the body, the bowel being the first. So he, you know, also has expressed incredible focus on the thyroid. And it's not just as simple as taking some iodine or taking some selenium. It's a comprehensive process. This is something we're actually covering right now in my hormones course. And there's a lot of factors. This is one of the slides from my course, but there's all these factors are things that I go through when I work with a client to make sure that we've checked off all the boxes. There's a handful of nutrients: iron, iodine, zinc, selenium, vitamin B2, B3, B6, vitamin D, vitamin A that are critical for thyroid functioning, and you have to go through these and figure out if you're deficient in them or if you need to replete them. And then, of course, there's things that damage the thyroid and that inhibit its activity. So you have to make sure that those aren't factors either, like chlorine, you know, making sure you have chlorine filters, you're not drinking chlorine, bromine, heavy metals, and we can go on and on. But really our focus today is what should you do to make sure that you have a healthy thyroid? And that is to make sure you're testing TSH, free T4, free T3, anti-TPO, and anti-TG. That's a really great starting point, and that's looping back around to my clients from this week. That's what we had to, with one of them, she actually had those done 2 years ago, and they proved to be well out of range. And for another person, we have to send them back to see if what they're dealing with their thyroid is metabolic or is autoimmune. I hope that makes sense to everyone. Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense to you guys. I hope this was super valuable for you guys. You know, if you're watching on a phone, I think you can click like, you know, if this has been valuable to you. I appreciate your feedback, and I'm just gonna jump in here on the chat box, the chat room here, to see if there's any things we can address or any questions I need to address. So Candace mentions that GP wouldn't know this because a brief visit of a few minutes is not sufficient. System's broken. Yeah, so, you know, in, you know, the standard of care, you know, the reason why we're here today is because, and this has been a sentiment of Dr. Mercola since he started his huge website, is you have to take control of your health. And I'm here to teach you the ways that you can do that, the ways that you can become your own practitioner. We all have to become our own practitioner. And I have this conversation at least a few times a week with my clients where they're just surprised and dumbfounded that a system that they thought was supposed to take care of them is not really taking care of them. The healthcare system, more of a disease care system. And I don't say that in a negative way. I actually think that the healthcare system is amazing. It's incredible for emergency care, and it's incredible for stabilization and diagnosis, and that's where it shines. We just have to know how to use it, and that's why we're here today, to learn how to use it. So, you know, our medical practitioners in the conventional medical system are not out to get us or anything. They're doing their job. They're working within the system the best they can. So that's why we have to take control of our health. Thank you for that comment. Dimitri says, wow, 17 years, and that was referring to how long it takes on average to bring something into fruition, into clinical practice. From the research to clinical practice takes about 17 years. In fact, we all know now that folic acid deficiency causes neural tube defects in fetuses and babies. That took 30 years. The research was out. It took 30 years for it to become a regular recommendation for doctors to say, hey, you want to get pregnant? Take a milligram of folic acid. Takes a while. Comment from Jennifer here. My GP just took a hormonal course and said the ratio of T4 to T3 should be 16 to 1, but he hasn't He wasn't talking about the free versions. Is this useful at all? I've never heard of it before. I feel like we talk a different language than them. Ratios are also really important, and that's the next level. What we're discussing here today is sort of first level. What do I get? What do I look for? What do I ask for? What numbers are important? Ratios are important too, and I talked about free T3 and free T4, but total T3 and T4 might be important to look at as well in certain situations. So that's kind of next level, but also really important to do. Stephanie Sibio is asking, what are all the ideal levels of these blood levels, the optimal levels? Well, we talked about TSH. I like to see people within about a range of 1 to 2. If you want to learn about all of the levels, my Gitalis system, the gitalisystem.com, you can actually go to, has a section in the back which goes through every blood test and talks about the normal range versus the optimal range. Obviously, in this forum, I can't start going through every single number in there. So, that's a critical tool that I think everyone should have so that they can be their own practitioner and check on their blood work. And you can check out optimal levels in that book as well. And Catherine, you can see in the chat box there, has posted the 5 things that we're referring to as key things to look at. Karen White said, when I told her that I was trying to make changes that were more holistic lifestyle and change things naturally, she looked at me like I'm an alien. I'm going to mention this to her. Wish me luck. Well, what I say to my clients is if your doctor looks at you like you're an alien, you're on the right track. Christine is asking, is treatment different for autoimmune versus metabolic? And yes, there are definitely some specific things that we address when we're dealing with any thyroid issues, some basic factors actually with any condition. But when it's autoimmune versus metabolic, yeah, there's a bit of a different treatment plan or a treatment goal. We're monitoring different things. We're addressing things in a slightly different way. And maybe we're even making changes in the future that serve, one of those issues a little bit more. But the cool thing about working with the body is sometimes the treatment for both is similar, even from a natural perspective. But I always like to know because it does get targeted a little bit better. Like, for example, selenium is critical for thyroid health, no matter what's going on. But lower selenium levels have been associated with higher thyroid antibodies. So for, if someone is presenting with autoimmune thyroid issues, selenium's like, a big one on the list for me, just as an example. We're going to wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for joining me. This has been the first episode of This Week in the Clinic. I almost forgot the name of it, first episode. This Week in the Clinic. We're going to try to do this on a regular basis. Probably next Friday, we're going to hit it up at the same time. We'll have new lessons learned from the week in the clinic. I want to take what I learned working with real people, what I learned in the textbooks, put that all together and present that to you so that you can make changes in your life. If you want to get more information about any of this, of course, you could visit joshgitalis.com. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope you all have a wonderful day and take control of your health. And we'll see you all again very soon. All the best.